the Dreamcast was well known for its many survival horror games, such as Code Veronica and D2, but one that not many people remember is Carrier. Now, to say it's just a mere Resident Evil clone would be doing a huge disservice to it, as although it clearly took inspiration from the series, it still manages to bring a fair few of its own ideas to the table. The story takes place in the near future, with a rescue team of sorts investigating an aircraft carrier after it picks up a strange organism and goes silent. The player takes on the role of Jack Ingalls, who finds himself stranded on the ship and must not only fight to survive, but try to figure out what happened and why the ship is seemingly overrun by hideous monsters. In terms of gameplay, you've got a few ways to deal with each enemy, but mainly one of the several weapons you'll find throughout the ship are your best bet. And what makes the shooting more accurate when compared to Resident Evil is that while you can aim anywhere on the screen, you also have a target which shows what body parts you're aiming for. Certain enemies have different weak points that can be picked out with the handy scanner, so testing where to shoot which one and remembering as you progress is the main way to stand your ground. Now, when it comes to visuals, Carrier is one of the more impressive titles to appear on the Dreamcast, and instead of opting for pre-rendered backgrounds and 3D character models, the entire environment is rendered in real time, from the dreary and lonesome interiors to the waves that splash over the ship outside. It all comes together to create an incredibly tense atmosphere that only worsens the further you venture into the ship. With its well-presented story, terrifying encounters, and nail-biting soundtrack, Carrier is by far one of the best survival horrors you'll find on the Dreamcast. There's no shortage of quality shooters on the Dreamcast, but when it comes to the ones that have largely been forgotten, Siberia 2 clearly fits the bill, and it's really unfortunate as it's one of the best examples of the genre that you'll find on the console. Originally released in the arcades, it got ported over in 2003, and the best way to describe it would be absolute chaos. It quite literally forces players down through all 7 layers of bullet hell, often pushing them to the very limits of what's possible when it comes to reflexes and the amount of patience of the average player. You've of course got your standard weapons as well as several power-ups to collect throughout each stage that all pack a real punch, but where the game comes into its own is with 2 main mechanics that round off your offensive options. By rotating the control pad through a series of full 360-degree circles, your robot will spin as long as you remain in motion. This serves 3 different purposes. It narrows your range of fire while making it more powerful, it speeds your ship up slightly to assist in weaving in and out of dense patterns of enemy fire, and it seems to make it easier to buzz. Now, the buzz mechanic is a system of powering up your robot based on how often in succession you can graze enemy fire. The more near misses you rack up, especially in a row, the higher your score, and when you level up you experience a brief surge of invincibility, which will really help out when facing down the relentless barrage of fire from the enemy. Although some players might be a bit disappointed with some of the changes that were made when comparing it to the first game, Siberia 2 is still a solid shooter for anyone who's looking for a serious amount of challenge. Fighting Vipers was a series that began in the arcades and eventually found its way to the home market on the Sega Saturn. A few years later, its sequel would also make the transition to the home space, thanks to the improved power of the Dreamcast, which was an absolute beast when it came to bringing the arcade experience home. Absolutely no corners were cut, and it offered up the same fast-paced fighting game with all of the characters and stages as well as a few extras thrown in that make it one of the best ways to play the game. Now, in terms of gameplay, for anyone familiar with Virtua Fighter, you'll know exactly what to expect, as it's built around the same 3D fighting engine of that series, albeit with a few tweaks that make it a bit more accessible. You've got your basic moves such as kicks, punches and throws, but for those looking to delve deeper, there's plenty of depth with a wide selection of special abilities and combos that require a more meaningful understanding of all the options you have during a fight. Of course, being defensive is just as important as going on the attack, and here you've got a couple of ways to hold out should you find yourself in a tight spot, the most notable of which is your counter moves, that when timed correctly allows you to block any attack that a usual parry wouldn't catch. As well as this, the armor system still plays a huge role, much like the original game, and if you block too much or if your opponent lands some heavy blows on you, you'll slowly lose pieces of it the more the enemy attacks, leaving you open to far more amounts of damage. But should you lose it all, you're then able to perform a super KO in a last-ditch effort to come out on top. The Dreamcast had its fair share of fighting games, and while Fighting Vipers isn't exactly the best of the bunch, it's still a pretty solid fighter that any fan of the arcades of old will instantly enjoy. Frame Gride is a mech-based combat game that came from the same minds behind the Armored Core series From Software, but instead it shares more in common with the likes of Virtual On thanks to its fast and visceral combat. Right from the beginning, you're asked a series of questions that determine the type of robot you'll get to pilot, as well as getting 2 different skeletons that come into play further down the line once you've unlocked one of the more intensive aspects of the game, and that's customization. Much like Armored Core, this freedom to design your own machines lies at the center of the experience, with you having the ability to change your armor, weapons and body parts, which all have a noticeable effect on each fight when put to use. Now, gameplay is relatively straightforward. You'll discover that in addition to your robot's basic functions such as melee attacks and shooting your weapon, that attacks differ depending on how close your opponent is, and by holding down the shoulder buttons, your swings of your sword and gunfire will be able to be far more effective from further distances. Coming along with each enemy is usually a subordinate who fights alongside them, and eventually you'll get access to some of your own that range from simple crab-like droids that follow you around and shoot at you, to small orb-like pods that act like landmines, to full-sized foot soldiers that attack with as much intelligence as the opponent itself. By collecting crystals that the enemies drop once defeated, you'll be able to spend them on this sort of help, as well as one of the many different pieces of equipment to customize your robot with. Although these days the online option is a distant memory, which was by far one of its best aspects, the single player mode still offers up plenty of replay value due to this system, and is as rewarding as an arcade style game could be. As its name implies, Charge and Blast is an on-rail shooter that quite literally sees you charging and blasting through several stages that slowly ramp up the difficulty as you succeed. You start out each of them with full health and a limited amount of time to complete them in, with the player only being able to move from left to right as you're slowly guided through the environment and met by one of the several different types of enemies that all come along with their own threat to deal with. You've got some that are quick and hard to lock onto, as well as complete bullet sponges that take a lot of hits to take down. Of course, you've got several ways to get the job done, with a few different weapons at your fingertips that range from machine guns to lasers and rockets that can all be charged up for higher amounts of damage. But the most important aspect is the timing of your shots, as if you don't do it correctly, you leave yourself well open to enemy fire and will quickly find yourself in a rut. Because of the insane amount of action on the screen sometimes, learning the right time to take your shot also becomes quite difficult, and as a result the game has a very steep learning curve. But after some time with it, it'll soon open up and see you dropping enemies like flies as each wave slowly advances towards you. Now visually, Charge and Blast is incredibly easy on the eyes, and even with all of the chaos going on at any given moment, the game never buckles and holds its 60 FPS throughout, allowing you to carefully pick your shots and never get lost in unbearable bouts of slowdown. If you're looking to play something that's easy to jump into and have a few hours of fun with, then Charge and Blast is just the ticket, and is even better if you've got a friend willing to join you as well. So if you can find it for a good price, it will make a welcome addition to any Dreamcast owner's collection. Star Lancer is a combat flight sim set in space and originally released for the PC that found its way to the Dreamcast and offered an action-packed experience made up of several different missions that see you exploring the solar system and dealing with one of the many challenges that lie within it. The story sees 2 factions at war, the Alliance and Coalition, and you take on the fight as a rookie who slowly must earn the respect of your comrades as you climb the ranks and earn a reputation on the battlefield. There's a fair few mission types as well that see you defending your fleet to escorting high-value targets and general dogfighting, which is where the game is at its best. There's a nice amount of different ships you can jump into, all of which offer their own unique setups such as different weapons and equipment that make listening to each mission's briefing essential, as you'll know exactly what you need before setting off in order to make sure everything goes as smoothly as possible. You've got lasers, homing missiles, guns and a wide selection of power-ups for your shields that make it all the more intense when you encounter an enemy fleet, and thankfully the control of your ship is not held back by the controller due to everything being mapped in a truly intuitive way. This allows you to quickly weave in and out of danger and tackle even the most intimidating of situations in a variety of different ways. You can simply hang back and pick off enemies from a distance, or get up close and personal for a far more visceral fight. Although it's clearly easier to play on the PC, the developers did a great job of bringing it to the Dreamcast, and even despite a few flaws, Star Lancer is still a great game to play on the system. So if you're fond of flight sims and are looking for something new, Star Lancer is a great option. Project Justice is the sequel to an often overlooked PlayStation game known as Rival Schools, and includes many of the unique mechanics that made the original so great, all the while adding several new ideas into the mix that make it one of the Dreamcast's most enjoyable fighting games. As with many games of this type, don't go into the story expecting Shakespeare, but this aspect of the game is surprisingly quite well done, and sees you choosing a school to fight for and going down several branching paths that make replaying it all the more worth it. On the gameplay front, it's your standard 3D fighting game setup, with each character sharing a host of basic attacks as well as individual special moves that help each of them stand out. But one of the best things about Rival Schools on the PS1 was the team-up element, which returns here in Project Justice, although this time you get to choose up to 3 different members. Now during each fight, there's a gauge that slowly builds known as Burning Vigor, and once it's full, you're free to perform one of the many different team-based attacks, some of which are quite humorous to watch play out. And of course you've got the usual ability to counter and parry your opponents with the right timing, which also contributes to this gauge, creating a nice sense of strategy to even the most trivial of encounters. As with most fighting games, you've got a wide selection of modes to get stuck into, from story to team battle, practice and multiplayer, that prolong the game well after the credits have rolled. And with the amount of unlockables such as new stages and characters, there's plenty to keep you busy. When it comes down to it, Project Justice is easily one of the best games the Dreamcast has to offer, and here's hoping one day we'll finally see a new entry in this forgotten series. Heavy Metal Geomatrix is one game that not many people know about on the Dreamcast, and that's no doubt due to the fact it released towards the end of its life and was ripped a new one by critics. I never quite understood why though, as sure there are a few flaws with the game, and that's mainly its camera, but it's nothing that completely ruined it on the whole. The best way to describe it would be Virtual On meets Power Stone, with it essentially being a party fighter that all plays out in an arena. As you would expect, the player gets to use one of several characters and power-ups such as different types of weapons and shields that all bring their own distinct amount of mayhem to each fight. The environments themselves also play a role during each fight, with many of the elements that make them up being interactive, may that be hurling pillars at the enemy or standing behind one for a quick breather. Now the controls are as simple as they come, with the face buttons allowing you to fire your weapon or perform a melee attack, as well as jump and discard any current item you have equipped. The analog and D-pad naturally step in for movement and aiming, but like I mentioned earlier, the inability to center or take control of the camera is what will likely annoy some who play it. If you're willing or able to look past it though, what you have here is one of the Dreamcast's most intense fighters that's absolutely perfect when playing with friends, and with plenty of unlockables such as new characters, power-ups and stages to earn as well. Heavy Metal Geomatrix will keep you engaged for quite a while and reward those who wish to seek out everything it has to offer. Napple Tale is a 3D action platformer with a few light RPG elements that throws you into the role of a young girl known as Asia, who finds herself lost within a mysterious new land, and while the story may result in the most cliché of video game concepts, the same cannot be said for the game itself and its surrounding world. It's all broken up into about 14 different stages that are made up of the usual moving platforms, well-timed jumps over moving objects and wide chasms, as well as a few puzzles scattered throughout each of the levels as well. It may sound simple, and much of it definitely is, but it's the design of these environments that provide much of the challenge you'll be facing. Everything just feels well crafted and thought out, that making your way through each stage will keep you on your toes right from the beginning to the game's end. One of the most important aspects of any platformer are the controls, and here with Napple Tale the developers nailed it, with them being both tight and responsive, allowing you to judge your jumps with confidence and take care of one of the many threats throughout the game with a few swings of your trusty wand. If you take your time and aim correctly, it's possible to create chains of attacks that make short work of all of the enemies you'll encounter, but by far the biggest obstacle to overcome are the various bosses that make up the game. These encounters take place in huge, free-roaming environments, with each of them bringing along their own unique traits for the player to understand and take advantage of. Overall, the amazing world, strange creatures, and numerous moments of humor and surprise make Napple Tale a worthwhile adventure, so if platformers are your thing, there's plenty here to love. AM2 are amongst the most influential developers of all time, with huge hits like Virtua Fighter, Daytona and Shenmue under its belt, but not many people know about one of its more obscure offerings on the Mega Drive, Rent a Hero. Although this sequel isn't directly developed by them, many of the company's veterans still had a hand to play in it, which takes the form of an action RPG, and sees the player taking up the role of Taro Yamada, who finds himself coming into the possession of a mysterious outfit that grants its user secret powers. Donning the suit, Taro takes it upon himself to start helping the people of the town. This is where the combat system comes into play, and takes the form of a beat-em-up where you're able to pull off a series of punches and kicks that form combos. It feels incredibly similar to Virtua Fighter, and throughout the course of the game you'll be unlocking and learning new techniques that grant you far more strength when it comes to taking on the town's troublemakers. Now there's a huge variety to the tasks you'll be undertaking, from delivering leaflets to stopping bank robberies, which can all be taken on by using your Dreamcast and searching the web for a huge amount of offers. It's fair to say that Rent a Hero is a rather quirky adventure with plenty of humor which helps it excel. The somewhat silly but extremely comical situations you'll find yourself in are enough to put a smile on even the most critical of players, and thanks to its great script, larger-than-life characters and jolly soundtrack, it's quite hard to put down once you've gotten into it. So if you're looking for something entirely different from the usual RPG formula, then Rent a Hero is definitely a game worth giving a shot. Well, that does it for another video. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell to get notified about new videos. You can follow me on all of the socials which are linked below to stay up to date, and also join my growing community on Discord to meet many like-minded gamers to continue the conversation with and to take part in giveaways. I'd like to give a special shout out to my Patreon supporters Rhino, Skill Jim, Shuden, Richard, Daniel, Dio, Omar, Strider, Pierre, Carl, Awesome Jacket Dude, Maximus, Scott, Alfred, Terry, Ryan, Alex, GameCube Galaxy, Curse Salaryman, Fake and Paddy J for their continued support that helps make these videos possible. If you're interested in joining my Discord or supporting the channel through Patreon, you'll find all of these links down below. As always, thanks for taking the time to check the video out. I'll catch you next time.